The true Christian, product of Christian education, is the supernatural man who thinks, judges, and acts constantly and consistently in accordance with right reason, illumined by the supernatural light of the example and teaching of Christ.
This is another in our series of programs on philosophies of education. A philosophy of education consists of those beliefs and values that guide educational thought and practice. In this program, we shall present the Roman Catholic philosophy of education.
National Educational Television presents Philosophies of Education, one in a series of 13 programs presenting some of today's leaders in American education, produced by KTCA-TV, St. Paul, Minneapolis. Teaching methods and courses of study in our schools differ greatly. This diversity, while an inherent strength in a free society, may be confusing. Guiding the differing ways of each teacher and school are differing beliefs about such matters as human nature, knowledge, values, and a good society. These comprise different philosophies of education. The purpose of this series is to set forth a representative group of these guiding philosophies. Here is Dr. Harvey M. Rice, president of Macalester College and host of our series.
Roman Catholicism is one of the great universal religions of mankind. It is worldwide in scope and possesses a history of nearly 2,000 years, stemming back to Jesus and the apostles. It is the religion of an organized church with a centralized hierarchical system and with a well-developed body of beliefs and practices. Education has always been of great importance to this church because of its concern for the propagation of the faith and for the nurturing of Christian personality. Fundamental Roman Catholic beliefs about human nature and destiny, about reality and knowledge, and about moral law and social institutions have significant consequences for methods and goals of teaching and learning. Philosophically, Roman Catholic teaching tends toward classical realism. While this is supremely exemplified in St. Thomas Aquinas, who in turn drew heavily upon Aristotle, some Roman Catholic thinkers emphasize the Augustinian and Platonic form of realism. Let us look now at a quotation, a portion of which you have seen earlier on this program, taken from Pope Pius XI's encyclical on the Christian education of youth. This quotation will introduce us to some of the leading ideas of the Roman Catholic philosophy of education.
The proper and immediate end of Christian education is to cooperate with divine grace in forming the true and perfect Christian. That is, to form Christ himself in those regenerated by baptism. For the true Christian must live a supernatural life in Christ and display it in all his actions. For precisely this reason, Christian education takes in the whole aggregate of human life, physical and spiritual, intellectual and moral, individual, domestic and social, not with a view of reducing it in any way, but in order to elevate, regulate, and perfect it in accordance with the example and teaching of Christ. Hence, the true Christian, product of Christian education, is the supernatural man who thinks, judges, and acts constantly and consistently in accordance with right reason, illumined by the supernatural light of the example and teaching of Christ.
We are very happy to have with us on this program Father Robert J. Henley, who was ordained in the Jesuit order in 1940. Father Henley received his bachelor's and master's degrees from St. Louis University and his PhD degree in philosophy from the University of Toronto. Since 1943, he has been professor of philosophy at St. Louis University, and since 1950 has been dean of the graduate school there. During these years, Father Henley has published a number of books, among which are St. Thomas and Platonism and Method in Metaphysics. It is also of significance on this program that Father Henley is a past president of the Philosophy of Education Society. Father Henley, it's a pleasure indeed to have you with us on this program, and we look forward to your sharing with us your views on the Catholic philosophy of education. What is the Roman Catholic position on education?
Well, Dr. Rice, I'd like to approach it in a rather simple sort of way by asking this question. Why is there a Catholic, Roman Catholic kind of education? I'd answer it by saying that it's because there are in the world people who believe certain things. They believe that God exists, that he exists as a triune God, that he sent into the world his only Son, Jesus Christ, to save man, to teach man as his messenger to man, and that Jesus Christ taught us certain facts which are essential to the living of a good life and to the securing of happiness. That he not only taught us certain facts, but he also held up before us certain moral ideals and gave us moral principles, principles of acting, and showed us a whole way of life, a way of living that would lead man to happiness both in this life and hereafter. And in order to bring this to every human being, these people believe that Christ founded an institution, a church, which was to last to the end of time, which is not merely an organization, but which would carry his authority and his message to all times, all places, all peoples. And that he would be with this organization, guaranteeing through its teaching the purity of his original doctrine. So that if we take this as the framework within which a Catholic thinks of life, this gives us a frame of reference within which, obviously, Catholic education will have to fit, because we'll want to start the child from the very beginning, living this life, learning the creed of Christ, learning the ideals of Christ, the code of Christ, learning to worship, learning to go to the sacraments, and so on. And this child that we start out, that the Catholic starts out in education, this child is seen by the Catholic to be not just a bundle of electrons and atoms, as the materialist might consider the child, nor just an animal, not even a super fine kind of animal, the high point of evolution. To the Catholic, this child from the moment of conception is a person that does indeed have a body and lives in the material world, but which has also a soul. And because it has a soul, is fundamentally, radically different from the material universe and anything in it. It becomes a value of quasi-infinite value, loved by God. Moreover, although the child therefore has intellect and therefore freedom, the power to be a responsible individual, this child was so loved by God that God has planned that he should have a new level of life. Not only the life of the body, not only the life of the mind, the intelligence, the life of the human will, but a life of divine love, which in a true sense would be a sharing in the life of God himself, a divine life. So that we think of moving this child from this undeveloped, dependent state through the development of the body and the development of the mind and the development of the will, through the development constantly of this divine life which the child has from the moment of baptism. This divine life which shows itself in action as a life of love. And so we would consider that the perfection towards which we are moving this child is not only a perfection of what we might call the natural potentialities of the child, but finally a perfection of love. And so with this view of the child, we see our education, therefore, from the very beginning as resting upon assumptions, being permeated with these ultimate views in such wise that it becomes impossible for Catholics to think of having a school system or a form of education that would not at all times be permeated with this kind of view. And so if we look into a Catholic school, we will find that the presence of God, the reality of God, the reality of Jesus Christ, the guidance and teaching of influence of the church, the ideals of the Christian life were constantly present. Within this kind of a framework, of course, we try to develop the child physically. We try to bring in all the disciplines, because one of the things, Dr. Rice, that impresses me about this kind of a overarching approach to the philosophy of education is that within this framework, where you see ultimately the whole thing against God's creative love and as leading ultimately to the salvation of the child in a union and love with God and with all men. This makes it possible for us to be open to every kind of a good development in human culture. You'll see in this school, from morning to night, we do indeed teach the creed of Christ. There's doctrine, the notion of the Trinity, the notion of the sacraments. There's also arithmetic, there's social studies, there's history. But all of this with a constant awareness of God's providence and God's love, so that within the framework of Catholic education, all human goods can be brought to the child. But constantly, again, against this general background with the interpretation. For example, when we approach history, while it'll be a strictly scholarly business to determine the facts of history, the Christian will realize constantly that there is a provident God, and that therefore in history we are finding God's providence. So that against this total background, we bring the child in contact with the whole of culture, but in such wise as to bring the child ultimately to the full perfection of Christian living, Christian independence, and finally, ultimately, in the next life, to the full union and love of God.
Father Henley, is it not true that Roman Catholic education is dogmatic? Does it not proceed from the assumption that truth is absolute and is known? This certainly is in contradiction to the approved modern point of view that truth is tentative and hypothetical.
Well, Dr. Rice, if we talk about a position that holds that we really don't know anything, that all the truth that we have is tentative and hypothetical, I would say, first of all, there isn't anything particularly modern about this position. This is older than the Christian position, older than Plato, as a matter of fact. If we're going to call this the modern, approved modern position, I would take exception with that. I think that the average person, if you leave a few academic philosophers to one side, the average intelligent and educated person takes a view something like this, that there are some things which we know for sure. We know, for example, that England is an island. We know that the moon shines by reflected light. These things we know. These are facts. It's not tentative. I don't think any geography teacher after says, children, England is an island, but this is quite tentative and hypothetical. It might turn out to be something else. So I think there's an area in which people agree there's something known. There's an area in which we have a lot of guesses, hypotheses, tentative statements, imperfect knowledge, and a whole vast area in which we don't know anything. I'd say that fundamentally Catholic education adopts this same pattern with this difference from non-Catholics, that in the area of what is known, we would put more things about religion than the non-Catholic would put, and this would be a difference between Catholic and non-Catholic. Obviously, if the non-Catholic thought that among the known was also the existence of God and the divinity of Christ and the institution of the church by Christ, then he'd be a Catholic. But as far as being dogmatic in general, this I would see as the only difference. And so we do have our graduate schools in which we try to achieve more knowledge, and we do recognize the tentative and relative character of a great deal of our knowledge.
Well, is it not true that out of the authoritarian character of Catholic education will come on the part of youngsters the attitude that we must believe what we're told, that only truth is what we're told, rather than to give the youngster the idea that truth can be discovered?
Yes, this is always a possibility of over-exaggerating a position. But again, I would simply make distinctions. I think that we want to train the youngsters to accept legitimate authority wherever he finds it. For example, for to tell a youngster, well, don't go to the doctor and take his advice, think it out for yourself, would, I think, be an unintelligent position. So we attempt in Catholic education to give an intelligent approach to legitimate authority, the authority of the courts, the authority of the policeman, the authority of the parent, the authority of the state, the authority of the church, and that this should be within a framework of thinking for themselves. We don't want automata. We don't want people that just say yes without thinking about it. The mature product of Catholic education ought to be a person in whose mind the legitimate authorities have been accepted because it's an intelligent person, an intelligent position.
Well, you believe and, of course, support very strongly your own schools for the purpose of teaching the Catholic position in education. Does not this kind of parochial school education create a divisive force in our society? Does it not remove the Catholic youngsters from the opportunity to learn in democratic ways as other children are learning?
Well, if by divisive you mean that this perpetuates differences in society, I think this is quite obvious it does, as does also, let's say, Sunday school and the Jewish day school, the existence of the churches, the two-party system. The divisiveness is part of our culture. The pluralism, I think the magnificent thing about American pluralism, as opposed to the old efforts to have a monolithic kind of ideological society, is that we are able precisely to allow people to propagate their differences and to live with differences. Now, if, however, this means that a divisiveness in the sense of hostilities and tensions, then this is always an accidental accompaniment of differences, but the whole effort of many other things we do, the notion of Christian love, the teaching of tolerance in our schools, the very many other ways in which in a pluralism like ours, children intermix in the playgrounds, in other societies, the scouts, the way Catholics participate generally in civic affairs and so on, helps to counterbalance this. So as I see it, the choice, the alternative to this is a pressure towards a uniformity, which ultimately, logically, should lead to a kind of a monolithic educational system and a monolithic opinion. If we want freedom, we're going to have to put up with all kinds of divisiveness. And I have enough confidence in American democracy to think that we can survive this.
The operation of a separate school system by your church leads you to take the position that public funds should be appropriated to the schools of the Roman Catholic Church for certain purposes. Does this not run counter to the long-established American position of the separation of church and state?
Well, Dr. Rice, there would be, at this point, there would be a considerable difference of opinion, I think, among Catholics, educators, and ecclesiastical people, as well as parents themselves. In general, my own position is that there ought to be some relief to the Catholic parent. I'm not particularly in favor of any kinds of grants from public funds directly to religious schools, but I think that in view of the fact that the parent is sending the child to a Catholic school as a matter of conscience, not as a matter of luxury, that the difficulty about attending the public school is precisely that as far as the Catholic parents goes, to get free education really has attached to it a kind of a religious qualification. Now, I think it is counter to the whole direction and view of American democracy to have any public benefits involved, connected with any kind of religious qualification, negative or positive. And so I think it's a matter of American principle rather than a matter of theology or of the wish of the hierarchy or anything else, that we should find some way to give the Catholic parent and the Catholic child some share in the common benefits of education. And if I once wrote on this, Dr. Rice, if I might read just one sentence, which to me is the fundamental principle involved here, I once paraphrased our principle in this fashion: no citizen, because of his religion or lack of religion, shall be deprived directly or indirectly, in theory or in fact, of the enjoyment of his rights, privileges, or benefits of citizenship, nor shall the exercise of the duties of citizenship impair his full religious liberty. So I think that out of this principle, some kind of a fair proportion of aid to the Catholic parent, the Seventh-day Adventist parent, the Lutheran parent, would be in full accord with American principle.
Father Henley, I wonder if you would give us your reaction now to this scene taken in a Roman Catholic school.
John, we have been discussing what things will happen to us when we receive confirmation. We said that confirmation does these things for us. It makes us strong Christians, perfect Christians, and soldiers of Christ. Today, we have been discussing this third point, being soldiers of Christ. The last two, we said, have to do only with ourselves. You children know that Christ did not just say to us, be strong Christians, be perfect Christians. He gave us, first of all, his example, secondly, his commandments and directions, and thirdly, some special helps. What did we say those special helps were, Jean?
The 7 gifts of the Holy Ghost.
Good, Jean. The first of these 2 points have to do only with ourselves. Notice, strong Christians, perfect Christians. Today we talked about that third point, a soldier of Christ. The first quality of a soldier must always be what? Sam?
Courageous.
Yes. Now let's look at that last point. A soldier of Christ is responsible for others. And let's take that idea and apply it to our social studies. Let's look at the map for a moment. We have been studying the eastern states, and we have noticed as we've gone along how these people depend upon each other, how they need each other. And all year, as we have studied these different units, we have noticed how interdependent the sections of the United States are. Now, children, can you see what the attitude of a Catholic must be toward these interdependent people? Interdependence is not just being a good American. Realizing our interdependence, the need for justice and charity, is part of our confirmation, part of being a good soldier of Christ. Now, can you think of some special ways in which these people of the eastern states depend upon each other and depend upon other parts of our country?
Father Henley, what do you think of that?
Well, Dr. Rice suggests several things to me. First of all, I think it should be pointed out that what we've just seen is a catechism class. This illustrates the teaching of doctrine, the creed that I mentioned before, which is done formally in classes of this sort. This isn't arithmetic or social studies, which would be taught in a more formal fashion with regard to those. I think also we could point out the atmosphere of this classroom, because if you notice, there were religious symbols over the blackboard and pictures and mottos and so on, which keeps that permeation of the atmosphere that I mentioned before. I think we can take it also as illustrative of the effort of the Catholic educator to put Catholic principle and the fundamental motivation of the faith and of religion back of all the child's obligations, his civic obligations as well as his religious obligations. And I would like to point out also that in a classroom you will always see certain classroom techniques, and this is one that's typical of Catholic schools as well as others. But you would, if we had a variety of such films, we would see a large variety of techniques used also in the Catholic schools.
I see. I wonder if you would take time now to make some comments on the relationship of the Catholic position on education to the problems of our public schools.
Well, Dr. Rice, it's pretty clear, I think, from what we've discussed on this program, that for the Catholic parent and in the Catholic view, nothing short of a fully Catholic education in the strict sense of the word is ideal, and nothing short of that will really satisfy the conscience of the Catholic parent and the needs of the Catholic child. And so I think the Catholic should carry away from this a deeper realization of the connection between the Catholic school system and Catholic education and the faith itself, these important facts of which the Catholic parent is convinced, on which he wants to build the life of himself and his child. But this is not the whole story, because I think it's also clear from what we've said and from the whole Catholic view of this matter that education at any level is a tremendously important thing for human beings, and that to give education to anybody is an obligation of every human being in every society. So that, to make this very practical, I would point out that the Catholic in a community, while he would want a Catholic school for his own children, should also be vitally interested in the education of all the other children in that community. In other words, the fact that he's a Catholic imposes upon him an obligation to be interested in making the public schools of the community the best that can be made for those children. And I might suggest that a parallel attitude on the part of the non-Catholic would also be in the finest traditions of American society and American democracy, an interest to see that the Catholic child has the opportunities and has the best that we can give them, because after all, these are the resources of America. And it's within these resources that we want to develop the fine people of the future while maintaining our freedom, but maintaining also our cooperative spirit.
Well, thank you, Father Henley, very much for this splendid presentation of the Roman Catholic position on education. In the short time available to us, we have presented some of the leading ideas of the Roman Catholic philosophy of education. A philosophy of education consists of those beliefs and ideals that guide educational thought and practice. We hope you will be with us next week when we present another in this series of programs on philosophies of education.
National Educational Television has presented another program in the series Philosophies of Education, produced by KTCA-TV, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
This is National Educational Television.